You're listening to the 49 Carats Podcast, a 49ers Goldmine production with Stephanie Sanchez.
What's going on, everyone? Welcome to another edition of the 49 Carats Podcast. I am your host, Steph. Joining me today, as always on a Monday, is Christopher Johnson. What's going on today?
Hey, what's happening, Steph? Good seeing you. How you doing?
I'm good. Not too bad. You know, it's the Monday blues as always. The weekend's not quite long enough. But you know what? We got some 49ers news to talk about today. And we are going to get right into it because John Lynch gave us some content that we could probably discuss for the rest of the offseason. Talking about the quarterbacks, of course, is always a hot topic of discussion. And today, John Lynch gave us some quotables, right? First, he said that Brock Purdy, he's the leader of the clubhouse and has earned the right to be. A statement that people are dissecting and interpreting a whole number of ways. Personally, for me, I don't think it's that surprising. I mean, if you've heard the 49ers, if you've heard like players mention Brock Purdy, they talk about Brock Purdy, it's always in a positive light, and it's always in this sense that he is the guy. He is QB1. So what John Lynch has said is not exactly any type of revelation to me, but Chris, like, how did you kind of interpret this? I mean, is this a big deal?
Yeah, so it's one of those situations, right, where it's like you don't know until you really know. I think that history has shown that, you know, it's kind of hard to decipher what John Lynch is saying when he says it. Obviously, you knew he was going to get this question today, so he probably prepped for it a little bit. But yeah, so I'm not surprised, you know, that was the response, you know, to your point. You know, Kittle had an interview where he talked about Purdy kind of being the leader in that regard in the quarterback room as of right now. I think Brand Aiyuk said some stuff on a live. So, and also, you know, beat reporters have been coming out with kind of some of the behind the scenes conversation that they've been having with players. So I'm not surprised that that's the narrative. I think it remains to be seen what it really looks like. I thought it was a little interesting, the optimism that John Lynch kind of shared regarding, you know, Purdy potentially being ready for training camp. I mean, we'll see what happens. I mean, we've been hearing the 6-month timeline, which would place him, I think, a little bit further into training camps, closer to the start of the season. So I'm kind of curious there. I will say this, though. Like, in my opinion, I don't see a circumstance in which Trey Lance and Brock Purdy are in the team at the same time, right? Can they coexist? Absolutely. But in my opinion, if they're really, you know, if it's determined that Brock is the guy, then I think you move on from Trey Lance, trade him, you know, get some stuff, some assets back for him. You've got Sam Darnold already. And, you know, that time's going to come. That decision is going to have to be made at some point, whether it's now or later on, right? Because you got to you know, a year from now, you're going to have to determine whether you're going to pick up Lance's 5th-year option. And if he's not the guy, you're not going to be, you know, wanting to pay all that money to a backup. I mean, he is, you know, cheap, you know, if he was a starter per se, but because he's a first round, you know, third overall, you know, he's got a little bit of a price tag on him and stuff. So for me, I'm kind of curious to see how this all plays out as the summer goes on. I think that the big wild card is still Brock's rehab and him coming back. So, you know, I think, you know, it's going to give some talking points, right? But I still want to kind of see, you know, how Brock is looking with his recovery. And if we're just going to be realistic, we got to just be realistic about the whole thing.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think we can assume that Brock Purdy's going to look the exact same, you know, right, pre-surgery. Although, like, when I did talk to Stefania, she did say that there shouldn't be any, you know, loss of arm strength for Brock Purdy from this surgery. So that's good. So he may very well be ready to go by training camp. Now, what I took John Lynch saying ready to go to mean was more so he's going to be good at practice by training camp.
Right.
I don't think he's going to be fully cleared by training camp. I actually thought it was a little problematic that he said ready to go, because that leaves things open to interpretation, and that leads many people to think like, oh, he's going to be fully cleared by training camp. No,
Right.
I don't think that's the case. I think like you're still looking at a 6-month timeline at least for Brock Purdy to be cleared. Now, it's good that we know, or we already knew, that he was going to be throwing after 12 weeks, 3 months, right? So, that piece of it is not surprising. And because he was going to be able to start throwing after the 3 months, then I always kind of figured he would be participating in training camp in some capacity. So that's what I think John Lynch meant by he's going to be ready to go by training camp. He's going to be practicing, because in training camp, you're not getting tackled anyway. You're not getting hit. So you don't have to worry about being fully cleared by training camp. You're not absorbing any hits. So, that's how I took it. It'll be interesting to see if, like, because Kyle Shanahan speaks tomorrow. So it'll be interesting to see if there's any walking back of that ready to go, because again, I thought that was kind of problematic for Lynch to say that.
Well, it's interesting. A couple more things about that. So he reiterated multiple times that it's Kyle Shanahan's, decision, but then he still spoke with such certainty that, Brock is the guy. He kind of said he's the leader of the clubhouse. Gives the impression that if Brock was healthy, he would be QB1. In which case that, kind of creates the circumstance I kind of spoke about a little bit earlier about what to do with Trey Lance. So, so I think that I have trust, that, cream always rises to the top. You know what I'm saying? So, I think the decisions that are made by Shanahan as to who he wants to be his QB1 will be ultimately what's best for the team. It'll be interesting to see circumstances. You'll probably be out there. I'm going to try to get out there to training camp this year for a little bit as well. So it'll be interesting to see what the eye test says, right? And what how they're doing in camp. And again, the wild card is ultimately, how many times have we heard timelines and people have setbacks and such. So
Yeah.
it'll be interesting to see, regarding Brock's recovery. If he wasn't injured, it sounds like he'd be the guy regardless, but here we are yet again because of unforeseen circumstance with, Purdy's injury. It creates all these clouds and stuff.
Yeah, and I think that's the uncertainty is very unsettling for some. For me, I don't feel whichever quarterback ends up starting, I'm like, okay, I'm just ready for this to be over. You know what I mean? I'm ready to know who's going to be the starter. We're still months away from knowing who that's going to be. But if Brock Purdy is healthy, sounds like that's going to be the guy. Fine. And I've seen a lot of people speculating, is Brock Purdy more of a John Lynch guy, or is John Lynch more of a Brock Purdy guy, I should say? And is it Kyle Shanahan kind of leaning towards Trey Lance? Like, is Kyle Shanahan more of a Trey Lance guy? Was that his pick? And so I've seen people speculate that. And so I've seen people wondering, well, I wonder what Kyle Shanahan's going to say tomorrow. I wonder if he's going to, say the same thing. I think it's going to be more of the same, quite honest. Like, if you listen to John Lynch, and you even said, like, he did reiterate that this is Kyle Shanahan's decision ultimately. And he mentioned in speaking with Kyle Shanahan, like, this is like, basically this is what we think together. It's kind of like how he framed it. So I don't think you're going to hear anything really differently from Kyle Shanahan tomorrow. I mean, you might hear more vague stuff, if anything, but I don't think there's going to be anything to really say, like, Trey Lance, or to point to Trey Lance a little bit more, so it'll be interesting for sure. To your point about, okay, well, if Trey Lance is not going to be the guy, what are you going to do with him? He did get asked the question today, John Lynch did, about, if, have you thought about trading Trey Lance? I don't know if that was the exact question, but I know it was along those lines. And John Lynch said, we listen. We always listen, but we like Trey Lance on our team right now. So one, I think it's interesting. He says, we're listening. He always says that. And he's always been asked that question to certain players that could be in like some kind of trade discussion. So it's not like if someone asked him, would you trade Nick Bosa? I don't know if he'd say like, we're always listening. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah.
Or like, is that always his answer? Like, does he always truly feel that way? Or is it just certain types of players? I wonder about that. But yeah, he always says that. I thought it was interesting though, because basically it means like, don't be discouraged to call.
Yeah. Right. One thing I will say. Yeah, that's fair. Yeah. One thing I'll say that, the questions that the press corps asked today were pretty solid, right? I think that Matt Mayoko's like final question was about the, kind of, I don't know if he was trying to make a direct correlation between Jimmy's career, where it started with the 49ers and Brock Purdy, but essentially he was talking about the sample size, right? Like, how do you know that Brock can sustain this level of play or whatever the case? I don't know if that was in relation to the injury or if that was in relation to, of course, Jimmy rattled off those 5 wins in a row. Brock rattled off 8 wins in a row, if it was going to be sustainable or whatever. I thought it was a good question by Matt. I was impressed by that. So I mean, he's saying all the right things, but sometimes I question, whether, like, I hate to say this, it's cliche, but like, what was he supposed to say, right? So, I think, ultimately the eye test will determine, how this all plays out and shakes out. I think a little bit less to your point earlier at the top when you were saying that, it's not too surprising what was said. I think ultimately what they do will kind of like speak more to, what the direction is as opposed to what's being said in like press conferences and stuff. Because we also know that they don't always show their hand. So
yeah, that's true as well. What I thought was interesting, just maybe like an hour or two after John Lynch finished speaking with the media, Ian Rappaport, he was on NFL Network and talking about all this. And they were talking about how John Lynch said, the leader of the clubhouse comment, speaking of Brock Purdy, not once in that little segment where he was talking about 49ers quarterback situation did he mention Trey Lance. I found that very concerning because, they go from talking about Brock Purdy being the leader in the clubhouse when he's healthy. And then he said Sam, and that's why they brought in Sam Darnold, because if Purdy is not able to start, you want a guy who has been there before, has the experience, and can start games for you. Not once did he say anything about Trey Lance. Nope. I thought that was concerning because I'm like, are you saying that because you've heard them say this, that they brought in Sam Darnold to like start just in case Brock Purdy isn't ready to go week 1? I mean, like, I always knew the scenario of Sam Darnold and Trey Lance would compete for QB2, right? But hearing Rappaport not mention Trey Lance in that, I thought was kind of weird.
Yeah, it was telling.
I hope that's not based on anything he's heard, because like basically like I just want Trey Lance to get a shot, right? I have no horse in what is it? Horse in this race, dog in this race, What is it? Whichever it is. I don't care like which quarterback wins, but I do want Trey Lance to get a fair shot. You know what I mean? Like, because Brock Purdy, the sample size that we got with Brock Purdy last season, and that's what's leading them to say he's the leader of the clubhouse. Trey Lance hasn't gotten that. Trey Lance hasn't gotten like a span of 8-9 games to like show what he has. And then we can make a decision from there. He hasn't gotten that. So like that, I just hope that he gets the off season at least to get a fair shot at the very least. It sounds like that's all he's going to get. You know what I mean? But it was very strange. I don't know if you saw that clip, but him not mentioning Trey Lance was kind of.
Oh no, I did. And you know what? Like, I've been thinking, obviously we think about this and talk about stuff like this all the time. And it's always in the media and the news cycle and such, and not to take anything away from Brock Purdy, his style of play and the success that he had this last season. But something that I'm still kind of like grappling with is the fact of when you see all the firepower that's at the quarterback position in the league right now, especially in the AFC, it kind of makes you think that there's a certain type of quarterback that you need to be able to overcome those, those quarterbacks or the ability to score fast or stretch the field or whatever the case. And I keep thinking to myself personally, like, it's like, to your point, I just hope that Trey at least gets the opportunity. If he gets it, it's tough, right? I just hope he gets an opportunity, because I still think to myself that his ceiling and his ability to be that really dynamic quarterback that, you try to go and get to be able to take out the Patrick Mahomeses or the Josh Allens or Justin Herberts or, whatever, that he might be more typical, that prototypical quarterback. Again, not trying to speak ill of Brock Purdy, but I'm just talking, just thinking about the ceiling that they both would have potentially. Not to say that Brock can't improve. I mean, I don't know, but you get what I'm saying, though? Like,
yeah, no. And I honestly, I think that was kind of the question that Mayoka was kind of, that last question, is a sustainable thing. That's, to me, that's kind of what he was insinuating, because we saw Jimmy Garoppolo in those first 5 games and thought, wow, he's barely scratching the surface, when it was actually the ceiling. Right. And so that's, to me, that's kind of what he was insinuating. And even if it wasn't, like, I have that question, like, is what we saw last season, was that Brock Purdy's ceiling, or is that his floor? I think it's probably closer to the ceiling, right? Not to say that he can't improve, but you got to look at the context of everything. One, he was playing within a quarterback friendly system. That being said, not every quarterback has looked great, playing it with this offense, or the Kyle Shanahan offense. Beathard, Mullins, some examples.
Hoyer.
But he was also playing with a exceptionally talented roster, maybe one of the best skill position groups in all of the NFL, or one of the best skill position groups that Kyle Shanahan has had to work with, right? So that's 2. And then I don't know. You think about the fact that a lot of teams, didn't have that much tape on them. It was a small sample size for them as well, so less time to really look at those tendencies and things. And you saw it. The longer that he had, the more teams were keying in on some of those trends that we were seeing, right? So
absolutely,
next season, I don't think we can assume it's going to be as easy, right?
No.
So that's kind of my thing. I think it's fair to question, like, is Brock Purdy, has he reached his ceiling? Is he going to continue to improve, or is that about all we have? And I mean, that's not to say that it wasn't good. Like, it was great. The 49ers were pretty much undefeated in that span that he started, minus the Eagles game, which I don't even know if we can count that. So, and he was efficient. That's probably the best we've ever seen a quarterback, as Kyle Shanahan being the head coach of the 49ers, is probably the best quarterback performance that we've seen, in that short amount of time, I think. I don't know. Is it sustainable? We'll find out, right? I really don't know. If it's more of the same, yeah, I mean, that's great. I could see why the 49ers would want to be like, yeah, he's our guy. But in reality, we don't know. What we did know about Lance is that he had potential. He had higher potential, I think, but we haven't even seen that. So it's hard to even make any judgments on Trey Lance either, right? So it's a very difficult decision that I think the 49ers are in. I get that they want to rally behind Brock Purdy because of the performance that he had. I just wouldn't be so quick to close the door on Trey Lance because of that. It's fine that it's fine in front of the media to like rally behind a guy, sure, but behind closed doors, I hope that they have a little more faith in what Trey Lance could potentially give them this offseason. but
I
that's yet to
agree.
be
No,
seen
I
as
totally
well.
agree with you. Yeah, and again, he's come off of injury. I mean, he has right now his arm is still in that brace or whatever. So that's
Yep.
the one part of the comments that I thought was so interesting. The fact that it sounded there was a lot of confidence behind, like because of his play last year, Purdy's like the leader in the clubhouse. Saying that about an injured player with a pretty significant injury, knowing that the media and fans and so on, talking heads are going to hang on every word. I don't know. That's a pretty strong endorsement, or maybe it's to light a fire under Trey. Trey did say in that long interview that he had with Rich Eisen that he's down to compete. He just wants to have a chance. So we'll see.
Yeah. And then Trey Lance's comments in that interview is what made me also think, like, okay, why is what John Lynch is saying today surprising to some people? Even Trey Lance, thinks Brock Purdy is a leader in the clubhouse. You know what I mean? Like based on what he
Right.
said in that Rich Eisen interview. So yeah, in that sense, it's not surprising. But again, I think me and Chris, we're on the same page. Like we want to see at least Trey Lance get an opportunity, a fair opportunity this offseason. So we'll see.
Sure.
Purdy, he's working with a doctor, Chris Kosher, I don't know. I think that's how you say his name. In Arizona,
I think so
he's
too,
He's a physical therapist with extensive experience working with baseball players that are rehabbing their UCL injuries. So that's who Brock Purdy is working with in Arizona. So great for him. Obviously, we hope for a good recovery for him. Hopefully no setbacks. But if there are any, we know the 49ers have a pretty decent backup plan with Trey Lance and Sam Darnold. But we'll just have to wait and see. Some other things that came up in, John Lynch speaking to the media today was Brandon Aiyuk. He said that the team was going to be picking up his fifth-year option. Not surprising at all. Makes a ton of sense. And I think the more interesting nugget was that the 49ers were getting calls from other teams interested see if they would trade him, because I think the 49ers or other teams know what a lot of us have kind of been knowing or feeling for some time. 49ers are not going to be able to afford both Aiyuk and Deebo Samuel on extension contracts. So that leaves the question, who is it going to be? Is it going to be Deebo Samuel or is it going to be Brandon Aiyuk who's going to be traded? As of right now, it doesn't look like Brandon Aiyuk is going to be the guy to be traded. But the point is the 49ers are getting calls. So that is not exactly surprising. And shout out to 49ers Sports Talk on Twitter, because he's been saying that for a few months now, that teams were calling in on Aiyuk. But yeah, what do you think about this one? I mean, if you think the 49ers had to make a decision between Aiyuk and Deebo, I mean, who are you going with?
Well, okay, so the finances, I think, makes it a little bit hard to move on from Deebo. Whether it's maybe it might get a little bit easier, I think, next summer. Right now, his dead cap hit would be too significant because he just got his deal. Me personally, I mean, I love Deebo. I mean, I got a signed Aiyuk jersey behind me. I got love for Brandon Aiyuk for sure. I think Aiyuk is the pure receiver. I think he keeps getting better and better and better. I think it's interesting to see what kind of productivity Deebo Samuel will have next year. He's got the injury concerns, misses time here and there as well. Aiyuk's always plays. I think he's a better receiver. I think he has better route running, creates more separation. If I had to pick, right, just apples to apples or whatever, apples to oranges, I'd pick Aiyuk. When you talk about the financial aspect of it, I don't think they can move on from Deebo until next summer without that cap hit being significant. That dead cap hit, I should say. What's one thing that's interesting, I think we'll know more, I think, once May 1st comes and goes, because you have to announce that fifth-year option before May 1st, and then that fifth year is guaranteed, 100% guaranteed. So at that point, if May 1st comes and goes and Aiyuk is actually still on the squad, I think he is going to be sticking around, because that would be like a 14.28, whatever that is, dead cap hit in his fifth year, even if he's traded. So, because that's guaranteed money. So if I'm not mistaken, I think that's how that would work. So I think that again, we'll know more based on their actions, after that particular period of time. But I think Aiyuk, it's a tough decision to have to make if we get there. But I like Aiyuk more than Debo, honestly, in that regard. Debo's got the flashier stuff. He's running through people's faces, of course, and he's Debo. He's got that nickname for a reason. But as far as like when you're talking about some of the more elite receivers in the league on a consistent basis, I think Brand Aiyuk in a different offense potentially where he's like a number one, he could probably do 13, 1,400 yards easy. So that's just my opinion, though. What you think?
I'm on the same boat. I think it makes sense. For one, I think, they're because of the, I guess, turbulent experience of having to like extend Debo, that whole thing. I think that could play into it as well. To your point, I think after June 1st, I think it gets easier to trade Debo because of dead cap hit lessons. That being said, I do agree it probably won't be until next year. It could be like a mid-season trade this season, but I don't see that happening unless the 49ers have no shot at making the playoffs or something like that. You know what I mean?
Right.
It just wouldn't really make sense. But yeah, I think that for all the reasons you mentioned, I feel that Brandon Aiyuk is also just kind of scratching the surface, and I think he's improving as a receiver. He's the better pure receiver. I think when Christian McCaffrey joined, when they acquired him, I think there's a lot of overlap in the skill set between Deebo Samuel and Christian McCaffrey. That right there makes Deebo Samuel a little bit more expendable. And I like Deebo Samuel. I love Deebo as well. I have a Deebo jersey. Love the attitude in which he plays with. And so I don't want this to sound like a trade
sure
Deebo thing, like pro trade Deebo. That's not me. I'm just saying, looking at it from the team perspective and knowing that they have to make this decision at some point, I could see it being Deebo as the one to be traded. So
for sure.
Yeah, and Alberto here in the comments says with CMC on the squad, I would go with BA. I agree, just because, again, I think there's an overlap in the skill set with Christian McCaffrey, who's going to be here for a few more years, and Deebo Samuel. And I also think that as a receiver, the type of receiver and the type of way that Deebo Samuel plays, as far as health goes, I don't know how sustainable that is. And, also going back to, last week we were talking about the 49ers cruise that you were on, right? And you heard Eric Armstead talking about, Deebo, he's never gonna have a season like that. I think everyone knows that. And yet he got that huge extension in part because of that one season, right?
Yep.
And so looking at that as well, he's never going to be at that level. Trade him while he's hot. Trade him while, he's on a team that can use his skill set that I think another team would honestly clamor for. I think a team would give up a lot for Deebo Samuel, maybe like a second or better.
Yeah, I agree. And you never know. I mean, sometimes circumstances present themselves where your hand gets forced, right? There could be kind of like with Azeez. I'm just using this as an example. Azeez Al-Shire was saying, and even Fred Warner was saying, like Fred explicitly said, and he said, I'm not trying to be arrogant or whatever. I'm paraphrasing is what he said. But he was like, Azeez wants to go and be me somewhere. He wants to go be the guy. And I want that for him, and he's with Tennessee. He's probably gonna be like, their Mike over there and like running that defense. Could be a circumstance in which Brandon Aiyuk gets to the point where he's like, I want to go be a wide receiver one somewhere, and he kind of makes the decision for them. So in which case, they try to look for a trade partner or something. So I hope it doesn't come to that, honestly, but you just never know. Things change so quick. Like I wouldn't have foreseen Deebo last year requesting a trade or whatever, even though he didn't really come out in the media and talk about it, but whatever, that's a whole nother thing. But yeah, you just never know. You never know. I just hope it doesn't come to that. But that could be a potential circumstance as well in which Brandon Aiyuk wants to go and, be the defined wide receiver one, as opposed to like everyone else thinking, oh yeah, he's more so the number one receiver on the Niners, but he might want to actually go and be that somewhere.
Yeah, I think that's fair to wonder, how does Brandon Aiyuk feel about his role? Because actually there was a tweet that,
Oh yes.
he tweeted out, and I'll read it off. He said 1K as the fourth option in a run first offense. 2 laughing face emojis. I'm as real as it get. Word a little baby.
I got a question, Steph. What did you think about that? How did you interpret that?
And that's a perfect segue to that, right? Like, because a lot of people were interpreting it as, oh no, the 49ers lowballed him, which it could very well be, or like he's just talking about like it's year 4, like I'm ready. That's a flex, right? Like he was able to get 1,000 yards being the fourth option as a run first offense. Like to me, he was just like flexing, like, yeah, like that. I'm him, but also I saw people talking about it as, oh, he's talking about negotiations, and that could very well be the case too. I don't know. We don't know. No one knows. Whatever we're saying about it is all just pure speculation, right? Only he knows.
So I got a question. So it's interesting to me. You're right. Only he knows. And it's, is he just kind of like, he barely ever tweets. Brandon barely ever tweets, which is another thing. So I didn't know if maybe his camp wanted to get an early deal and they were like, they came back with something weak, or they said no or whatever. What kind of took me kind of by surprise with that comment was him saying he's the fourth option on a run first offense. But I wonder what he means when he says that, right? Is it in the eyes of everybody else that he's the fourth option? Because he had the most targets last year.
Yeah, I'm like, I don't know if I agree that he's the fourth option. I mean, who is above him? Like, Christian McCaffrey, Kittle at the end of the season, I guess between him and Debo, that's kind of debatable. Yeah, I certainly would not put Juwan Jennings above him.
Right. So I don't know if
options.
Yeah. Yeah. So I don't know if he's saying that in the sense of like in the mind of like the masses or the media or fans, because when you look at the numbers don't say he's the fourth option. He had the most targets, most yards, most average yards per catch. He didn't have the most touchdowns, but he was second. Kittle had 11. Aiyuk had 8. So I don't get that part of it.
Yeah, I guess like looking at that, I don't really either. Now, if this was in response to something the 49ers may have said or may have, I don't know, the kind of offer that maybe they gave him, it wouldn't be surprising to me. We know the 49ers start with their lowest possible offer first. Right. Many players have spoken about this.
Kittle too, one of them, yeah.
Yeah, so, I mean, it wouldn't be surprising. Also, if I'm the player, I wouldn't be too discouraged about it. Clearly, the 49ers picking up his fifth-year option, they want extra time to negotiate with him anyway. So, we will see. But I'm not panicking too much about that tweet. I don't think it's a bad sign. You start with your lowest possible number in negotiations, maybe even lower than your lowest possible number in negotiations. Like that's just how the 49ers roll. At this point, I feel like the veterans who have gotten their extensions should all go to, these younger players who are due for extensions and be like, hey, like, just so you know, like, this is how it goes. Like, don't be discouraged by it. You'll just keep like chipping away until you get to the number you want, kind of thing. Like, because it seems like every player's a little jaded by it or a little like thrown off. Like, whoa, I thought I was this in your offense or your defense, what have you. But you're offering me this. Like, I think they feel a type of way about it, which isn't surprising. But I feel like it would be beneficial for some of those veterans to kind of get in these players' ear and be like, hey, like, it's okay. This is just how they do business kind of thing.
Yeah, I don't
But
disagree with you. Yeah, these
yeah,
cats always talk about it and they realize and they know it's a business. You know what I'm saying? Like whether you're negotiating for a car, you're buying a house, whatever,
yeah,
there's always going to be that dance a little bit. So I think it's kind of interesting in that regard. And then also, I mean, some of the players who've been around have seen that these guys get paid. You know what I'm saying? Kittle get his
yeah,
deal, Trent
exactly.
Williams get his deal, Fred Warner get his deal. So yeah, so sometimes it's a matter of patience and stuff, and not getting sticker shock in a negative way the first time they give you that offer, because it's a dance, it's a business. So
Mm-hmm.
I'll
It's a
be
long
curious to
dance.
see.
It's a very long
Yeah,
dance, as we know with this team. I think that's why the negotiations for these extensions take so long, because like they're so far apart early because of that first very low offer, and then like I said, I think they kind of chip away at it over time, and that could take time. It'll be interesting to see what they do with Nick Bosa. Who I think they're going to extend him this offseason, most likely. Probably closer to training camp, like it always is. But he's a different player. He's one of those guys that's like, do you really want to lowball him? I mean,
right.
he can play hardball if he wants to, but
Oh, most
that's
definitely.
a whole different topic. I digress. Now, John Lynch mentioned a couple of other things. He announced that the 49ers signed another offensive lineman, Matt Pryor. I don't know much about Matt Pryor. As far as I know, I think he spent some time with the Colts. He spent some time with the Eagles. This is nothing more than a depth signing for the 49ers as far as, how I see it. And that's good. I mean, the 49ers do need quality offensive lineman depth, and I don't hate it. I mean, Pryor does have starting experience, so that's always great when you can get a depth piece who has starting experience, who can at least finish a game for you if you need them to. That's never a bad thing. So,
Yeah,
yeah,
I didn't know much about him until I saw some tweets yesterday, actually a couple days ago. Brian Baldinger likes him, and he
I
actually
saw that.
he actually kind of said that he suspected that he would sign a deal with San Francisco or Chicago. Um, this is a big dude, 6'8",
Yes, he is.
340. I was like, oof. But like, yeah, so I agree. This is another kind of like we talked about last week. Another looks like depth signing. I think he's played a couple positions before too. I might be wrong, but I think I think he may have done tackle and guard before. But again, we're at that point, right, where we're going to just be bringing people onto the squad for some good camp battles, guys who may or may not even make the team, right? Yeah, I'm all about it. I'm all about it, reinforcing the trenches as they've been doing so far, it looks like, and just kind of gearing up for some good battles in training camp.
Speaking of offensive linemen, and this is not something that came from John Lynch, but Mike McGlinchey, I guess, was asked about it, or he brought it up. I'm not sure, but Mike McGlinchey said the 49ers considered trading him last season. To me, honestly, that's not so surprising. I think the 49ers look at every player who has 1 year left on their contract and considers it. You know what I mean? Like, I think you kind of have to. The 49ers traded, was it 2 running backs last season? It
Yeah,
was
Trey
oh my god.
Sermon, did he get let go
Tracer.
or get
No,
traded?
no,
And he
no.
may,
Did Tracer get traded?
yeah, I think he got let go like in
I
training
think
camp or
he got
something.
cut, but I'm talking about
Okay.
the other one in the middle of the season. And he went to the Dolphins, and I'm forgetting his
Oh,
name.
Wilson.
Yeah, there you go. So, yeah, I mean, that's kind of a similar situation in mid-season trade, like just because this guy's only got 1 year left, we know we're not going to resign him. Let's try to get something in return. I think they look at that for any guy who has 1 year left on his contract. I would have been curious to know what Mike McGlinchey would have gotten, like if what we would have gotten for Mike McGlinchey in the middle of the season. Seeing as how much he got paid, he got the freaking bag.
Yeah, he
I don't
did.
know. I'm like kind of wondering what he would have been
Yeah.
worth. But yeah, it's different when it's in the middle of the season. But I thought that was interesting, not surprising, but interesting.
Yeah, I agree with you. One thing I will say is I think it speaks to how the Niners do business, right? Like the Lynch basically was saying that they were, and again, I'm paraphrasing, but up front with him mentioning that they essentially kind of forecasted that they wouldn't be able to bring him back, that they might even consider trading him. I mean, like when the Niners moved up to 3, they called Jimmy ahead of time to let him know. I get the impression that they have a reputation of just keeping it real and being transparent as possible with these players and such. And that to me is refreshing because you hear a lot of times how players feel as if they're blindsided by a decision or a choice or whatever the case. Now, I'm not saying that Mike McGlinchey was happy with the prospect of being traded or that Jimmy liked it when they moved up to 3, but they had the conversation. You know what I'm saying? So I admire that. I really like the fact that there seems to be transparency that the front office has with the players, depending on where they are, whether it's, Lynch talking about Trey Lance, he wants him to kind of like, work on his health and be healthy. I mean, stay healthier or whatever. Or even, the prospect of the Niners potentially trading Mike McGlinchey in the upcoming year, which was last year they had the conversation. So I think that's great. I think it's great the ability for them to just be open and honest and be very transparent with the players. I think it builds a good culture.
Yeah, and on that subject, like not so much of it being like the transparency aspect, but like the fact that I think we have a large enough sample size of this regime that like we kind of know how they move now, more or less, like how they look at certain contracts, how they look at restructures, how all these things, how they do extensions, like all these things. I think we kind of know what to expect more or less with this team, which I think is good. I like to know what to expect
for sure.
because I think the first few years we're like, what the hell? What are they doing? And then now it's like, oh, okay, now I know. That's not surprising. So, I think that's good. A somewhat surprising thing the 49ers did over the weekend was they traded for a kicker, Zane Gonzalez, former Panthers kicker. I believe he even spent some time with the Cardinals, if I'm not mistaken, before that as well. I thought this was somewhat surprising. And at first, I did not like the move because I thought to myself, for one, there was a report the previous day that Zane Gonzalez was going to be cut. He's going to be released because the Panthers brought back Cody Pinheiro. So I thought to myself, oh, great. Like, that's an option for the 49ers. Then the next day, I hear they traded for him. And I'm like, what the hell? Why would you trade for a guy who's going to be released?
Right.
And then I thought about it. And then more information came out. Okay, it was going to be conditional 7th round pick swap in 2025. That's so far into the future. That's so far into the future, and it like that it doesn't hurt you. And also, it's just a 7th round pick. And also, I thought about it. I was like, okay, maybe other teams might have been interested in Zane Gonzalez, but also, you keep him at his current contract. If he were released, he's a free agent. He gets a new contract. So looking at it that way, I was like, okay, fine. This was a pretty good move. I mean, Zane Gonzalez could end up being the starting kicker. He definitely has the experience. He spent last season hurt for pretty much the whole season. I think it was like a bad groin injury or something that kept him out.
Yeah, he like hurt it like during like warm-ups or something. Yeah.
Yeah, so not great, but the 49ers do need a new kicker. They would like to spend less money on the position. I think this is a great way to do that, bringing in, a guy like Zane who has starting experience, but is also on a, cheaper team friendlier contract. I believe he only has like 600 something guaranteed too. So if he doesn't make the roster, I mean, you're not spending that much just to see what he has, right? So it's fine. I'm fine. It's fine. I think the 49ers still bring in a kicker at some point, most likely via the draft, to compete. But I'm okay with it. I think Zane Gonzalez probably ends up being the guy. We'll see.
Yeah, we'll see. And I'm with you for everything that you said. Only thing I'll add is, I mean, that I think that ultimately it sounds like there may have been some other teams that were kind of going to be, giving him a phone call or his team, his camp a call because, even despite the fact that he was going to get released, and you make a great point about him being a free agent as opposed to absorbing that contract. He had a great 21, of course, as you said, was out 22 because of his injury. Other thing that John Lynch said today during the press conference, or during his interview, I should say, it wasn't like an official presser, but anyway, was that this was a move at kicker, not the move at kicker. So to your point, that doesn't preclude them from maybe bringing someone else in for competition, drafting a guy late, bringing someone as an undrafted free agent for there to be a little bit of a competition. So, I think that I like the move. Sounds like they're definitely moving on from, Robbie Gould because of his comments, saying that he's probably going to move on. But I wouldn't be surprised, right? If something, especially with this team, if Robbie somehow says, okay, just pay me whatever and I'll come back or something. So sounds like John Lynch was saying that this is just another move for them to begin to shore up their special teams room, but that they may keep looking.
Yeah, and it makes sense. But another signing that the 49ers made late last week was for defensive lineman, another reclamation project for Chris Kosarek. Austin Bryant, former Lions pass rusher. And to me, this is simply a depth move, but I think it's a solid depth move. I think a lot of people would say that Austin Bryant, for one, you might ask yourself, well, who is he, first of all? And that's fair. But how many times have we asked that same question about, guys coming into the 49ers and, a year or two later, we're like, no, we don't want to see him go.
Right. Yep.
So I'm expecting somewhat more of the same. Now, I'm not saying he's going to end up, being a starter or anything, but he'll be a rotational piece. And if he's not, then he's depth, right? Like I think at the very least, like it's a good move in that regard. So I'm not mad at it. I think he's kind of a speed rusher, so I think that kind of goes well with what they're looking for. I still think they would like to find that elsewhere, either maybe looking at the draft, or also there's a lot of free agents still out there, quality free agents, still out there, so they could look at it then, but. Also, they're strapped for cash, so I don't know if they'll be able to afford any of the guys that are available, unless maybe after the draft they can look at who's available and see who wants to take a very cheap deal, right?
Yeah.
But Austin Bryant, I mean, he'll be able to compete in camp. We'll see how he looks like after a couple weeks with Chris Kosarek, right? And see what turns out of that. But I think it's a good signing. I'm liking the depth signings that they're doing, and really after that first wave of free agency, that's kind of pretty much what I expected, right? Like just depth signings, because again, they don't have a lot of money, so I think they're just gonna hang tight with some of these like really cheap options. They may bring a couple more guys in before the draft, but like that's kind of what all I'm expecting. We'll see what happens after the draft, but I have a lot of money to work with.
Yeah, I agree with you. I'm all about it. I mean, you spoke about it a little bit earlier. I mean, with the body of work that this team has, with their scouting department, as well as Chris Kosarek's ability to just get the most out of these guys, in which they either, go on to sign another deal elsewhere, or maybe they stick around with us for another, 1-year deal or something like that. I'm all about it. I mean, whoever they are bringing on that D line, I know is going to be someone that can compete in camp. And if they stick, I expect them to play well, just because of the coaching and the scouting that we know as well. So I agree with you. I'm all about it.
Yeah. Well, we covered a lot of topics today, and I got to get going because we got a Bully Ball podcast with Jay that I got to record after this. It's actually going to be live right after this, so make sure you guys check that out. But yeah, we're going to be talking about pretty much the same things me and Chris talked about here. But we'll get the commentary, Jay's commentary about hating kickers. So that should be fun. So make sure you guys.
He's been going
make
off
sure
on Twitter
you guys
about it.
Tune in. So for those of you guys that tuned in, make sure you guys like this video. Make sure you subscribe to the channel. Have a good rest of your Monday. If I don't see you in the other live, I'll see you guys next week. All right. Peace.